So if you're not aware already, we have a Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Tom Holland. This deal was reached after The Amazing Spider-Man 2 bombed at the box office, and Sony had to work in collaboration with Marvel Studios to 1. Save the Spider-Man name and franchise after its slight decline with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, not just in story and quality but in money, and 2. To win over the fans again after the overstuffed TASM 2. And then when Captain America Civil War came around, we saw the introduction of the Wall Crawler on Team Iron Man, and now we have Tom Holland Spider-Man as one of the leading forces for Marvel Phase 4 and going forward. But what if this wasn't the case? What if Andrew Garfield was the one in the MCU, and not Tom Holland? What if Andrew was brought in after The Amazing Spider-Man 2? I mean, they originally planned to have the Oscorp Tower from The Amazing Spider-Man 1 be in the background of the Avengers movie, which would have been a cool little reference to the web films. But let's say the original scenario played out. Let's say The Amazing Spider-Man bombed and Sony needed an exit plan, something that would get them out of the financial mess which was The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But instead of completely ditching the Amazing Spider-Man franchise, they still want to carry on with it. They want to finish what they started, and Avi Arad wants his Sinister Six movie. So what happens? Marvel and Sony come to a deal that Andrew's Spider-Man gets to enter the MCU, and the Amazing Spider-Man films are now attached to the MCU timeline and become a part of that continuity. Now I will admit, this comes with a lot of problems already, like the fact that part of the Marvel-Sony deal originally probably was to have the recasted Spider-Man if Sony wanted him in the MCU. This is because, and no offenses to Andrew here, but if the fans and critics alike saw the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man in an MCU movie, TASM 2 would bring the bad taste from the Garfield movies into the MCU, and Marvel and Kevin Feige probably didn't want that bad reputation. Now, with that being said, the rest of the problems are just story-based, like the fact that Andrew is way too old to join the MCU, and how did the Avengers not know about the Lizard or Electro, etc. However, that's the challenge today. If Andrew was want to join the MCU instead of Tom Holland, then how would it have been done? Well, let's find out. So in this scenario, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 just happened and it's flopped. Sony need an exit strategy, they have to save money and the Spider-Man name. Luckily for them, this is the best time they could have messed up, because just as the film flopped, another movie was currently in production, Avengers Age of Ultron. Sony call Marvel up and they tell them that they need to save Spider-Man and need to reach a deal. Sony ask Marvel if they can throw Andrew into Age of Ultron so fans see him with these other Marvel characters, and it might revive the name so they can move forward with Andrew in the MCU, and they carry on making solo Amazing Spider-Man films. Marvel see the potential in this, and that a character like Spider-Man could elevate the films financially if they collaborated. They both oblige, however there are some strings attached. Marvel now have full creative control over the Spider-Man films, and they will be funded by Sony and will be hosted inside the MCU with Sony's own Andrew Garfield. However, there is another string attached to that from Sony's end too. One of their films will have to feature the Sinister Six in some capacity. Marvel agree, and now Andrew Garfield is a part of the MCU. The final deal is that Marvel is allowed to put Andrew Garfield in any team-up movie in the MCU they'd like, whilst also producing and overseeing 2 solo Spider-Man films inside the MCU, and Sony are allowed to make 1 Spider-Man related film that may or may not connect to the MCU. This will allow Sony to get what they want, financially restabilize Spider-Man, and also create their Sinister Six and Venom film, and also have the Amazing Spider-Man 3 set in the MCU. But before we move forward with the story, we have to explain the big events that have happened across both films, and explain them away into the MCU. The way we'll have this happen is the Amazing Spider-Man 1 take place just before Avengers 1. This way, not much will be known about the event, and it also will be overshadowed by the Avengers and Loki battle, which most people will consider them a part of the same tragedy. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 will take place just a year later in 2013, along the same time that Iron Man 3 did. This is the period in the MCU timeline where New York is left alone for a while. And I think the only big problem here is that someone like Electro would most certainly be on Tony Stark's radar. However, this is just one of the problems that will have to blow off as something that just has to be. We could say that Tony was so busy with the Mandarin and worrying so much about other alien invasions that he was too busy to even care about Electro, who was like a done day thing anyway. Cap was off with missions with S.H.I.E.L.D. along with Black Widow, Thor was off doing the Dark World stuff, Hawkeye was with his family, and Bruce didn't want to be the Hulk anyway, so there we go. We have the Amazing Spider-Man films integrated into the MCU. MCU Phase 1 now goes Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America the First Avenger, The Amazing Spider-Man, The Avengers. MCU Phase 2 now goes Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Guardians of the Galaxy, Captain America the Winter Soldier, Avengers Age of Ultron, and Ant-Man. Which brings me onto the next part of the story. Avengers Age of Ultron. This is where we introduce Spider-Man into the Avengers, except we're not going to actually be introducing him. He's going to be a reference in this film for the Civil War storyline. You see, if this deal happens in 2014, it's a little too late in the game to throw him in there with any real significance. So instead, there will be a scene just before the final battle where Tony and Cap are discussing that they're going to need help. Tony suggests creating Vision, and obviously Cap and some others disagree, just like in the real film. Cap suggests a kid called Spider-Man. Whilst the other Avengers were off doing other things, Cap read up on the Electro incident in New York and saw that Spider-Man was one at the helm of it. He suggests bringing him in, however Tony disagrees, saying that he's just a kid. Then the movie plays out the same from there, with the Avengers beating Ultron. Now let's skip on to the next part of the story, the Civil War. Civil War comes around and the story plays out the exact same, except Spider-Man, now he's already established and will play a bigger role. Before, he was just thrown in to be another member of Tony's team, but this time there will be a conflict. Spider-Man is a little bit older in this variation, and we already have had the whole thing about him wearing a mask in the first movie, which will play heavily into this one. In the scene with General Ross explaining the destruction caused over the past couple of years, the Electro incident will also be a part of it. Spider-Man would be directly blamed for it, and the people start to turn against him. Spider-Man will meet with the Avengers and they will introduce themselves to each other. Tony, still like in the real movie, says that they should turn themselves in to work with the government, but obviously Cap disagrees. This goes deeper than just working for the government. Tony talks to Spider-Man and explains to him that much more people will get hurt if they carry on doing what they're doing. Spider-Man tells him that he agrees and the people's safety is what matters to him the most. So Spider-Man is Team Tony. Then we have the whole scene of Cap and Bucky being chased by Black Panther, except for this time Spider-Man will be there as well, and you could throw in maybe a funny introductory scene between T'Challa and Spidey. They take them down. The movie will play out the same from here, except Spider-Man will be in the background of some shots. Then we will get a special scene where Peter visits Gwen's grave, and he is conflicted, really adding depth to his character in this movie and really integrating him into the MCU. He will explain that he doesn't know what to do. If he does the right thing and sides with Tony, he will have to reveal his identity. And that plays also into the reason why Gwen died in the first place, because someone knew who Peter was. So this does play with Peter. Does he save a bunch more people but then loses the ones he loves? Or does he save the ones he loves and then potentially lose a bunch more people? Then none other than Steve Rogers will appear behind him. This is going to be the point in the movie where Cap has escaped just after Sharon had given them their stuff. Instead of fighting him, Peter explains that he didn't even want to be a part of this. Peter will also question how Cap found out his secret identity, and Cap says because he knows some guys who used to work at S.H.I.E.L.D. Cap uses this as a gateway by explaining that many more people will know who you are, and the people who love you will get hurt if you reveal who you are. Peter explains to Cap that's the reason why he lost Gwen, because of who he was under the mask. You see him visiting Gwen's grave here really fits into the whole identity thing. Cap will use this to level with Peter and understand his pain. These two characters really connect here, which contrasts to the real MCU because obviously, as we know, Tony is the one that has that deep understanding with Peter Parker, but here it is Captain America, also with it slightly being Tony as well because he sided with him at the start of the movie, putting Spider-Man in alignment and understanding where both characters are coming from. Spider-Man acts as the middle ground. This scene really explains to us as an audience why the identity is so important to Peter Parker, and this really digs into his character as well. Cap explains he's always saw potential in him to become a real Avenger. Cap explains also that real Avengers don't shy away from the real problem, and Peter asks what that is. Cap explains how the situation with him, Bucky, and Siberia goes a lot deeper with the whole Zemo connection. Peter explains that that's the right thing to do to stop Zemo, to stop this whole conflict, because it isn't right. And he's the one behind all of this. Not Tony, not the government, it's him. Peter switches sides and tries to understand with Tony and tries to get him to understand what they mean by this and what is actually going on, but Tony is too struck on the fact that Ultron caused all that damage and he just needs to save people by working with the government. Then the movie plays out the exact same, except Spider-Man is already in there, and then obviously we have the whole airport fight, Team Cap versus Team Tony, and then we have the Cap and Bucky fight with Iron Man at the end. The rest of the movie plays out the same, and that is it. That is Peter's real first introduction into these characters. So that was part 1 to What If Andrew Was in the MCU. Now, I originally intended this to be one video where I write and explain all the ins and outs of how this would be connected, But I found that this video was way too long, so I'm gonna have to split it up. In the next video, I will talk more about the Amazing Spider-Man 3 and what it would have looked like inside of the MCU if it had happened this way, and how it connected to Infinity War and Endgame and leading up to the Sinister Six. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.